Hi, I'm Michael Levine, and today we are going to go on a journey. Some of you are going to find the journey discomforting, and some of you are going to find it fascinating and insightful. To my friends that find some of what Dick Morris has to say discomforting, I ask you to bracket your distaste for whatever his political views are and ask, is there something I can learn from this? Is there something that this has to instruct me or to teach me? To people who agree with Dick Morris, you will find the episode that the journey we're going to go on, I think, quite fascinating. Whether you agree or disagree with Dick Morris, there is no question that he is one of the most astute political minds of our time. We are at a moment in American history in which the understanding of politics is vitally important. Therefore, I ask you to come on this journey with us and try, if you can, to suspend whatever political views you have and listen carefully, listen intuitively, because I believe that Dick Morris has a lot to instruct you on, whether you agree or disagree. And I, as a political independent, have always found Dick Morris fascinating. So I hope you will, and allow the journey to begin. All right, Dick, the key to the questions that I received from hundreds and hundreds of people all over the world was, how did Dick Morris become Dick Morris? This was far more popular a question than specific incidents. So, Dick, you were born in New York City?
Actually, New Rochelle, New York. It's just
New
north of
Rochelle, New Rochelle,
But I
New
grew
York,
up
which
in
is in a
New York.
Westchester County. Okay. You
I
went to
grew
high
up
school,
Yep.
high school where?
in New York, and I grew up in New York City.
Okay.
I lived in Manhattan on West End Avenue, and
Okay.
I went to Stuyvesant High School in New York, and I went to Columbia in New York. And I always wanted to go into politics from the time I was 4 or 5 years old or 6 years old. And I worked as a kid on setting up a sort of political machine that ran politics on the west side of Manhattan. And when I was 18, my college roommate, Jerry Nadler, was elected to the Congress.
Oh
And
my God.
and also other people who are prominent in politics now. And then I moved on and became a political consultant. My very first client was Bill Clinton, and I didn't know, he didn't know about politics, and I didn't know about Arkansas. And we met and we had a long, long conversation. And since then, we became kind of joined at the hip in understanding politics together. And I worked for him in all of his campaigns for governor, 1978, 1982, 84, 86, and 90. But then in 82, I'm sorry, in 80, he fired me. And he said he wanted someone with more of a national reputation. And he lost. And that was that was delicious. And then when he ran again, Hillary begged me to come back and take over the campaign, which I did. And then over the years, I became more and more of a Republican personally. And I admired what Reagan was doing. I disagreed with Reagan on just about everything, and he was right and I was wrong. I thought by disarming ourselves and by nuclear test bans and stuff like that, we could retard the danger of nuclear war. And in fact, we accelerated it. And it was clear that it was Reagan's policies of defeating the Soviet Union that eliminated this specter from the world to the extent it's eliminated now. And I worked for Republicans and Democrats, but increasingly more Republicans. And then in 1992, Bill Clinton, as president, lost Congress to Gingrich, and the Republicans took over. And Hillary and Bill called me and said, "We're desperate. Can you come back like you did in 1982 and save us?" And I said, "Okay." And I went to work for the Clintons as a former Republican, as an almost Republican. And I told the president that I thought his major problem was working with the Republican Party, and he needed somebody who knew what they ate for breakfast, and that I could do that. And I worked for Bill Clinton and helped orchestrate welfare reform and 4 years of balanced budget and a lot of other good programs. And then I had to resign in the middle of a scandal, and I became an international consultant, largely because nobody in the U.S. would touch me because I was radioactive. You remember those days, Mike? I used
to. I do.
And so I became an international consultant, largely on exile from the U.S. because Republicans hated me because I got Clinton reelected, and Democrats hated me because they thought I had hijacked his presidency, and there wasn't anybody left. So I became a international consultant, and I've had great success. I've gotten 15 presidents or prime ministers elected around the world in places as diverse as Japan and Taiwan. And I handled the Brexit campaign in Europe and all over Latin America and Mexico, where I toppled the PRI, the dictatorship that had run the party. And then one of my parents' close friends and my father's client was Donald Trump. Trump was my father's real estate client, and I met him occasionally, but we had a strong family connection because of my dad's relationship with him. And I got cancer in 2008, and after tongue cancer, which is fatal for a political consultant. And
Yes.
after I called Trump and I said, "I'd like to come and help you." So starting in 1990, I began working for Trump, and I've been working for him almost full time ever since. And we've developed a very close relationship, closer even than I had with Bill Clinton. And I've been doing what I can to pilot his comeback. I wrote a book called The Return about how Trump would come back, and he certainly has.
Oh, my goodness. Well, you've given us so much to talk about. By the way, Dick, I think you know this, but I wanted to mention to you, I was born and raised on 15th Street and 3rd Avenue in Manhattan.
You mean you're an East Sider?
Yes.
I'm not sure
So
we'll compare our relationship here.
yeah. Isn't that fun? Anyway,
Forget the Continental Divide. We have Central Park and Gramercy Park between us.
yeah, Central Park and Gramercy Park. Right. So, Dick, I want to understand, what was it now with the advantage of hindsight that elevated the transformation from you becoming a Democrat, or were a Democrat and now a Republican? It was you indicated it was Reagan's policies that were clearly working that woke you up to this particular evolution.
Yes, that's true. Reagan said it best when he said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me." And I think that's so true, and has been true over years. When I worked for Clinton, I really believed that we could fashion solutions that were of appeal to both parties, and we did. Bills we passed, welfare reform, balanced budget, all of that's raising the minimum wage.
You created a concept called triangulation that Can you talk about triangulation? This was revolutionary in political life in that period of time.
It's obviously a nautical term. It's how you find out where you are on a boat in the middle of the ocean, looking at the stars. And I felt that the politics in the country had become so uh, poisonously polarized between left and right. And I felt that there were solutions that could appeal to both sides, and that it was important to embrace those. And when Clinton lost control of Congress and came to me and said, how do I serve as president? I said, adopt solutions that are attractive to both parties. So, for example, the Republicans wanted to eliminate welfare, and the Democrats wanted to give it to everybody. So I said, how about work requirements for welfare and time limits? And the Democrats wanted to balance the budget by raising taxes, and the Republicans wanted to by slashing programs. And I said, well, why don't we not slash Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and education, the key programs, but cut everything else, cut the hell out of the Post Department, Amtrak, all the other expenditures. And out of those positions, we crafted really a third way, a middle way, which permitted Clinton to govern. And I'm very proud of that. It could still work today, except the Democratic Party has gone completely insane.
Let's talk about that, Dick. You have viewers watching this all over the world, and you have many Democrats watching it, and you have many Republicans watching it. And there is a feeling among Republicans that Democrats have now passed a point that really falls into the category of clinical insanity. And I want to talk about that because there are many people who differ with you, and there are many people who think the Republicans have crossed a line. But let's talk about your feelings. And you have a great historical knowledge. Is this a democratic place that they are currently in? Unprecedented, and have they really passed the point of clinical insanity?
Yeah, well, I don't think that each Democrat is insane. And I
Right,
think there's great hope for therapy, Freudian and otherwise.
right.
But I believe uh, that the key thing here is that you the constituencies have moved so far apart that the politician can't straddle those differences. And they end up advocating purist points of view that do
Mhm.
not admit compromise, do not admit multiple priorities. I mean, for example, everybody really agrees that there is climate change going on. And a lot
Right.
of people, it's due to man-made activity. Some don't, but a lot. And we all agree that there are things we can do to reduce man-made activity, like, for example, switching from coal to natural gas in generating our electricity. But the left has become purist, almost theological in its approach to this.
Right.
They
It
think,
does appear that both parties have a theological orientation. It's almost an orthodoxy.
well, not both parties. I think the Republican Party has one, it's always had one. But I think the new thing here is that the Democratic Party no longer takes positions. Have they have axioms and almost commandments that they follow, and they follow
Yes.
it routinely. And I think that they've gotten so at variance with what Americans want. Americans want the genders to be separate. They do not want men to compete in women's sports and win all the scholarships. They do not want to close down our whole economy until renewable resources can fill the void. They do not think that oil is per se evil, or gas. Uh, they they do not want to be involved in a lot of foreign wars that kind of never end. And I think that, and they believe that the fundamental laws of economics, that if you spend way too much money and you don't have the productive capacity to match it, you're going to have unbelievable inflation. and that can destroy the economy.
Which is
Um,
why mayonnaise is $9 in the supermarket today.
because we kept buying mayonnaise and couldn't produce it because the
Yeah,
supply chain got blocked during COVID. We just
right.
thought by jamming money into it, we could solve the problem. We also decided to open the borders. The left basically does not believe in borders. It believes that we're all one human race. We live on one planet and get along. And these artificial constructs known as national boundaries are obsolete and ridiculous. Republicans believe that the vast majority of the world is under governments that are authoritarian, that do not permit free speech, that crack down on political opposition, that exploit their people. And we don't want to be one of those. And we don't want to be part of a global framework that encourages that and almost requires it. So we opt out of that. And I think that the American people basically side with the Republican consensus. And that's why Trump is winning everything by incredible margins, one after the other, despite everything they can throw at him.
Now, Dick, there is a thought about differences between Democrats and Republicans, or liberals and conservatives. And it goes like this, and I want you to comment on it as to whether you think it's true or not, largely true. Conservatives think that liberals generally are foolish and naive. Liberals think that conservatives are evil and selfish. Is that a modestly fair remark from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that the policies end up kind of there, but I don't think that's really their objective. I think Republicans believe that the most fundamental thing you can do to enhance yourself and to help yourself, which is to make money and to build the economy, is a very constructive thing. And that is something that ends up being very, very good for the human race and for global progress. So they believe that making money is going to ultimately lead to a much better planet. They would point out, and I would join them, that despite tens and hundreds of billions of foreign aid, the only thing that has ever really worked and has indeed freed 2 billion people from poverty is capitalism and basically trade. When the US opened its markets to foreign products and put hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans out of work, the left lamented that, but ultimately it was what Schumpeter called creative destruction, and it ended up working to the benefit of everybody. So I think the left kind of thinks the right skips those steps and that they want to have everybody make a lot of money so they can. And that's true, but it's not the story.
So much of it seems that as you observe Democrats, so much of their logic seems rooted in emotion, and so much of the Republican seems rooted in logic. Is that a fair remark, Dick?
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I think that I think emotion and and an unthinking commitment to something simply because it's attractive emotionally.
It's a utopian type of desire.
Yeah.
By the way, Dick, in 1964, or 1965, I believe, when Lyndon Johnson created a war on poverty, the poverty rate in America was 15%. We have now spent trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars on the war on poverty. It's now 55 years later. What is the poverty rate in America today? 15%. 15%.
Of course,
So
the poverty rate has changed its definition.
That's right.
Would make most people 50 years ago feel like millionaires, but right.
Right. But the point here is that on purely logical grounds, giving money to people, lots and lots and lots of free money for years and years and decades has not done what it was hoped to have done.
But what's worse is what it has done. It's replaced
That's right. Talk about that.
people from working. It's given people the impression they can just have a free ride. And the ethic that underscored work, move ahead, work hard, move up, is fundamentally compromised. And instead, there's been a sense of grievance, a sense
Right.
that if only we could be treated like everybody else, we'd be fine. And that leads to an atomization of our political system into ethnic voting blocks.
It also
And
leads to a great sense of entitlement among the receivers. If
yep,
you give people stuff for a long period of time, they come to believe internally and externally that they're entitled to it. Is that a fair remark?
yeah, I think it is, absolutely. Um, and I think that they feel they're entitled to it not as individuals, but because of the color of their skin or their racial background or their country of origin. And it ends up being something that is not constructive toward building our economy in our country, but destructive. I think that one of the big things that Trump is doing right now, that's one of the greatest things he's doing, is he's taking this atomized, balkanized country with blacks, Hispanics, Asians, gays, transgenders, all of the different categories. And he's merging them together because he's achieving a consensus among all of them that he ought to be the president. And we all look at the changes in poll numbers and say, wow, Hispanics are voting for Trump, blacks are voting for Trump. Yeah, they are. And the key thing here is that we're all coming together as a country around the consensus that growth is good and that jobs are good.
And open borders are bad.
Yeah.
Really, really, really bad.
Look, the fact is that there are 8 billion people on Earth now, and that we cannot possibly lift them all out of poverty. And nor is it fair for us to take the American worker and harness his wages to the bottom of the scale of 8 billion people. And that really goes back to Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was a Republican because he believed the only way up was to work and to get a job and to be out of poverty. And he did felt that because his father was a subsistence farmer. And he opposed slavery because you couldn't have an economy where people would work and make money and move up if half the population was enslaved and worked because you whipped them and made them do it. And he believed that, and whereas the other model, Jefferson's, was very much based on class and rank and privilege, and often inherited, sometimes earned, but ultimately violative of the norms that Lincoln proposed. And I think that we're getting back to the Lincoln approach through Trump. I think that's essentially what his program is. Overcome the sense of entitlement. Instead, work for it, make things work, have the country operate well, and get your reward as part of that. And don't try to freeload.
Dick, you know Bill Clinton maybe as well as anyone, at least in a political sense. Does Bill Clinton at his core know that what the Democratic Party, his party, is doing is just completely off course and insane?
Yes, he does. I think he does. First, I've not spoken with him in 10 years,
Right.
but I believe that I believe he does. The question is, what is his core? Does he have a core? Uh,
Yep.
Clinton's core has always been a combination of what's politically advantageous and what he personally believes. And I think the formula has shifted to a point where it's about 90% the former and only 10% the latter. And
Right.
I think Hillary's candidacies and her involvement in politics tilted stuff in that direction. And I think Clinton is now happily just mouthing what the Democratic Party wants. On the other hand, I think he's smart enough to realize that this is politically flawed. And I would expect that as Trump moves toward the election, Clinton is going to move to the center because he'll see that that's not necessary for survival. He's not surviving politically, but for relevance.
So let's talk about you and your life currently. You write books, you appear on Newsmax regularly. What is your life about and like, and what is your belief? Are you an optimist or a pessimist for America in the next 5 years? Not in the next 25 years, but in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I'm very much an optimist. 5 years, 5 months, everything but 5 minutes. And
Okay.
that I'm
But Dick,
pessimist.
how, given the state of the nation at this moment in time, how is it logical that Dick Morris is an optimist in the next 5 years? What
Well,
in the Lord's name would have to happen for this country even to approach neutral in the next 5 years?
yeah, Mike, Trump winning has a lot to do with that. That the value structure that makes America what it is reasserting itself, and the excrescences, the extremes of the Democrats and the radicals are being bleached out of the system very quickly. That really is what the campus protests are. They've gotten so marginalized that they can't speak for America anymore. But in a broader sense, look at the world right now. Our biggest adversaries have serious problems within their countries that completely cripple them. China is an economic basket case. And if Trump raises tariffs on them in response to their imperialism, which he will, I think he absolutely forces them maybe into upheaval. Iran is totally dependent on America's blindness and letting it sell oil, and we could plug that anytime we want it. Um, Russia is basically a third world country with nuclear weapons, and it's totally dependent on oil production. And we can turn that off anytime we want simply by regaining our sanity and outproducing oil. And we could dwarf their oil production dramatically. Uh, when we look at the world, 2 billion people have moved out of poverty since 1980. And 1 billion of them have lived in India, and an emerging democracy that I think is very encouraging. And within the United States, I think that we're ending racial barriers. Um, it doesn't look like it because those that remain are the fixation of large numbers of politicians who like to get elected. But I always like to tell the story that I'm a baseball fan, and that we used to say that Willie Mays was a great black baseball player. Then we said Derek Jeter is a great baseball player, and we omit any comment about his race. I
Right.
think the fact that I think a third of all marriages in this country or relationships are interracial. It's basically ending race as a factor in the American society. We're basically all becoming the same race, which is something the right abhors, but I love. And I think that there are such incredible grounds for optimism. But the major one is that on almost every major issue facing the United States right now, Donald Trump and his supporters basically agree with me and with each other.
Surprise,
and,
surprise.
and with each other. We all have come to believe that we need to encourage renewable resources, but that we can't hobble ourselves by not producing energy. We all basically believe that the radical and crazy spending in recent years serves to placate domestic constituencies, but at the price of inflation.
That's a sophisticated word for buying votes, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is.
You just buy votes by giving people free stuff,
Yeah.
like the tuition forgiveness program. Now,
Well,
why in God's name would someone do that?
it's more than
So-
free stuff. It's a belief that you don't, that there are no consequences. Inflation is its own unique fraud because we all think we're making more money. We all think we're moving up. We all think, wow, this is great. But we're like an animal on a treadmill and
Yeah.
it's moving the other direction. And we just,
And so many Americans feel like they're on a treadmill.
yeah, and we just don't get it. But this fundamental disjuncture, look, we had a relatively benign and neutral presidency in Clinton. Then we had Obama, who moved gradually to the left, but while he was president, not dramatically so. That waited until his third term under Biden.
Mhm.
And then we had a major experiment on the right and on the left. Donald Trump did his thing, and Joe Biden did his thing. And we lived through 8 years of first one thing and then the other. And they were as pure as you could get. You couldn't get to the left of Biden and you couldn't get to the right of Trump in mainstream politics. And one worked and the other didn't work.
It's just about as simple as that. A couple of quick questions before we part. You're a historian in certain understanding of politics, certainly. Will Joe Biden go down, in your opinion, as one of the worst presidents of this country?
Yes, he will. Absolutely. And the amazing thing about it is that his errors are largely unforced. Okay, you can forgive a president who takes office in the middle of a depression or in the middle of a war or in the middle of an epidemic. But all of Joe Biden's errors are unforced. Nobody made him open the border. Nobody made him eliminate the gender differences. Nobody made him give racial preferences to minorities and make the federal government no longer a colorblind intermediary, but a partisan in the fight. Nobody made Joe Biden open the borders so that we became part of a global standard of living and asked Americans to adjust to what they pay the Chinese. And these are all unforced errors by Joe Biden. I think it's a calamity of mistakes. You can look at other bad presidents and say what doomed their presidency was not their mistake. Andrew Johnson was an alcoholic and he basically was pro-Southern, but that wasn't a mistake in that sense. Herbert Hoover was committed to free markets when it was no longer viable, but that really wasn't a mistake. It was an outlook. And Lyndon Johnson led us into Vietnam. But I think that everything that Biden has done is a mistake. And his government is built on mistakes and on errors. So I don't think he's the worst character that's ever been president. I don't even think he's the dumbest guy, even in his current senility, that's ever been president. I just think he's the most wrong-headed guy. And his solutions and his views are just wrong. Not right, not left, just wrong.
Who is real, in your opinion, who is really running the White House? There is a
Obama.
feeling there's a feeling among many that Biden is simply neither able, capable of running it. Is it Barack Obama?
Yeah, you're completely right. Look, Obama's perspective is in the first term, he pretended to be a healer and a uniter and was incredibly powerful. In his second term, he let his strong racial bias show, but did not really corrupt the government with it. In his third term, the Joe Biden administration, he let it loose. And this country got experience at a racist left-wing regime, very much as if we had elected George Wallace in 1968. When we
In an
really
opposite sense, yeah.
exactly. And I think we're experiencing it. But I think America is blessed by these two experiences. They've seen the extreme conservative view under Trump, and they've seen the extreme left view under Biden, and they've come to important conclusions as to what works and what doesn't work.
Has President Trump learned from his mistakes? Meaning, does he understand and grasp that though his policies may be popular and effective, his personality was very wearing and exhausting on the American public.
No, he hasn't gotten that lesson at all, nor will he. Uh, the important point to bear in mind is that the dysfunction of Washington cannot be solved by a reasonable man who says reasonable things in a reasonable tone. They can be solved by someone who takes strong positions that some consider maniacal and make them work. And Trump gets that. Take best example I choose to use is North Korea. Did diplomacy stop Kim Jong-un from exploding bombs during Trump's presidency? No.
Hell no.
What caused it was that Trump said, he said, I have a button that can blow up the US. And Trump said, listen, you mother, I have a bigger button than you do. And that completely solved the
And
problem.
calling him Rocket Man. I mean,
Yeah,
the thought, this is a very important point, Dick, and you're making it with a bit of humor, but it's rather brilliant. The problems that we face are so grave and so entrenched that they cannot be solved by a reasonable man saying reasonable things. Now, I've never heard anyone quite say it that way, but it's very much worth considering.
reasonable means that you are not, it's not the middle point or 50-50. Reasonable
Right.
says you do the things that work and you do the things that are appropriate.
I mean,
And
one of the things that Donald Trump did with NATO, now many presidents had gone to NATO and said, listen, guys, with all respect, with all honor, it is time for you to pay your bills. Please, we really would appreciate it. And no one did anything. Donald Trump went to NATO and said, pay your damn bills or else.
well, you're on your own.
Yeah. Now, which
Exactly.
one worked? It's just that
Exactly.
simple. One may not be appealing to your sense of decorum, but
Right.
one worked. Anyway, Dick, are you working on a new book?
Well, I just decided to a few days ago,
Oh,
and
great.
it's going. The tentative title of it, you know, my last book was called The Return,
Right.
about Clinton back coming back to Trump coming back into power, and this book will be called Victory. It'll be talk about what we need to do with Trump's likely victory in this election to stop the deep state and fundamentally to change America back into a democracy, not a bureaucracy.
Last question, and though prophecy is dubious business, and you may have more insight into this than many that you can't speak to, but do you have any predictions on who Donald Trump may choose as a vice president?
Well, that's more a question for a marriage counselor than a political consultant. because,
That's
because,
great.
because the real question is who can he get along with and who can
Yeah.
do. And I
Yeah.
think the one thing that Trump has learned from his first presidency is that, you know, he would sit in a room with someone and he wouldn't let them say a word. He would talk the whole time and he'd tell them everything he was planning to do. And the other person in the room would nod their head and say, yeah, I agree. That's great. That's true. And then Trump would emerge from the meeting saying, we have an identity of views. We agree on everything. In fact, this guy is a wonderful guy. And then he'd appoint something and he would screw up and Trump would have to fire him. And I think Trump is determined not. And the only guy that actually succeeded that was Mike Pence, who did everything Trump told him to until he didn't. But I think that fundamentally Trump is, first of all, he's going to choose a vice president without reference to what helps him politically. I think that he's won the presidency on his own or is about to. He's on the route to that. And I don't think he needs to pick any particular person or any particular
So,
gender.
in other words, he will not pander like having a woman or a black necessarily.
He might, but he's not going to do that for pandering reasons. And I think that therefore he's going to choose a vice president who would be very much like the kind of person he'd hire to be second in command of his business. And as long as that isn't Michael Cohen, we're going to be.
Well, Dick, you have been a fascinating guest. You have probably given many people an understanding of what really is going on, and you've also probably made the our friends on the left rather disturbed, and Donald Trump's fans rather comforted. So, Dick, you've been a great guest. Thank you for your time, my friend.
You take care. Bye-bye.